Hey guys, M here from Transformers and Video Games. Well, I've recently been tagged in the Transformers Tag Challenge, so I thought I'd take a crack at answering these 15 questions myself. So sit back and enjoy, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Okay, so just to explain this Transformers Tag Challenge briefly for anybody who hasn't stumbled upon it yet on YouTube, Nathan Simmons is a YouTuber, and I believe he started it. He came up with 15 questions that he sent to a couple of Transformers YouTube personalities who in turn answered the questions and then went ahead and tagged other people to answer the same questions. So it's been going around quite a bit, and I was fortunate enough to be tagged actually by a couple of people. Dolcar from Dolcar Toys and Stuff, who's now known as Q from Q Reviews, tagged me first. Then Chris from Six Shot Changer Reviews. We were chatting in the comments because I'd watched his video where he answered the questions, and he mentioned in the comments that it'd be really cool to see me answer the questions. So I'm going to count that as being tagged as well. And most recently, Graham, also known as the Collector75, tagged me in his video. So I thought I'd take a stab at the 15 questions. So anyways, sit back and relax, and I guess get to know me a little bit better as a collector. All right, so let's move ahead with the first question. What is your favorite Transformers toy in your collection? Now, my answer to this question would vary depending on when you ask me, but at this exact moment in time, I think my favorite Transformers toy in my collection would be my MP36 Megatron. I had been waiting years and years for an upgrade to MP05 Megatron to be released, and I certainly wasn't the only collector out there in that situation. I don't have the hate for the old version of Megatron that most other people seem to have, but it was a figure that really didn't fit in with any of my other Transformers, and it was also a figure that I was more or less afraid to transform just because of all the horror stories I'd seen. I remember watching a YouTube video 8 years ago or something like that, and a guy had actually broken his right in half, and quite honestly that was enough for me. I didn't even take mine out of the box. I just sort of bought it as a collectible for my collection because I'm a Megatron fan, but I quite honestly just didn't even bother removing it from the box. So MP36 would be my favorite Transformers figure in my collection right now, and I quite honestly like it so much that not only do I have the Takara Tomy official version, but I ended up buying this, what do they call this one? Dynastron Lord of Chaos. And I had actually seen a number of videos on Ben's Collectibles channel where he'd gone through all the differences with these different versions of Megatron. I was sold on this one because it had a number of other features that the regular MP36 didn't have. You had what people are calling the hairy chest, which I personally think that sounds a little bit ridiculous, but there's the little swirl that's on Megatron's chest. Very reminiscent of the sticker that was on G1 Megatron. Well, this particular version has a chest you can switch out with the standard version that has that. As well, he's got a faceplate that's very reminiscent of the G1 toy, which I think is really cool. Come to think of it, I should have probably pulled out the figure instead of this box. It probably would have been easier, but anyways, I guess vision's 20/20 in hindsight. But that's the answer to my question. MP36 is my favorite figure in my collection right now. What is my most expensive Transformer? There's another easy one for me. Several years ago, I invested in a official Fortress Maximus, the Hasbro version. So this was a vintage version of the figure. So obviously it was fetching quite a bit of money on eBay and other, other places, toy cons and that sort of thing. I didn't pay the sort of money that I think a lot of other people were paying at the time. I heard about people spending, $1,200, $1,500 on that figure. I think in my case, I spent and don't tell my wife this, but I spent $800 Canadian, if I'm not mistaken. That's a lot of money, I think, on an individual toy. Mine came box complete as well, I should mention that. So I think that's certainly factored into the price. At the time, I think I got a great deal. I don't know what it's worth now, based on the fact that we've got the reissue of the figure, and we also have the Titans Return version. So I'm not sure these days what a G1 Fort Max goes for, but I know that's the most I've ever spent on a Transformers figure. How many Transformers do I own? I don't have an actual running tally of the Transformers that I own. I really should. I do have some notes that, quite honestly, they haven't been complete for probably a year or two now. But based on my original notes and some sort of rough math that I've done, I'm going to say I've got 850 Transformers. And just to put a little context to that, 850 Transformers does not include any sort of third-party Transformer or any sort of knockoff Transformer. So if you wanted to add knockoffs and third-party Transformers, I'd be looking at about 1,000 Transformers, give or take. And I think that's a pretty large number, to be honest with you. I can only imagine the money I've spent on that over the years, but I don't really want to dwell on that right now. So anyway, we'll say 850 or 1,000. One more thing I should point out about my 850 number is that I have included, when it comes to combiners, I've included each specific robot from the team as a separate robot. So for instance, I don't just say, Devastator is one, even if it happens to be the Devastator gift set. In the case of Devastator, I will have broken that down into 6 separate robots, which make up Devastator, which I quite honestly think is the most appropriate way of doing it. What is the worst Transformer that I own? Well, if you'd asked me this about a year ago, it definitely would have been this guy here, G1 Wheelie. But I'm gonna give Wheelie a break this time. The worst official Transformers that I own is actually this guy right here. I bought this guy thrifting. In the last 6 to 9 months or so, I've been doing a fair bit more thrifting. And one thing that I had ignored in my early days of thrifting was looking at toys for whatever reason. I think it was sort of the collector's mentality in me that I always wanted my figures to be 100% complete, mint or near mint condition, and ideally have the box. But I've sort of overcome that a little bit. I'm happy to look at the baggies, for instance, at Value Village, and I had been known to buy a figure or two. When I saw this figure here, I should say what it is. I guess that'd be nice. This is the Beast Wars Transmetal 2 Cheetor. And when I saw it in the baggie, I actually thought, because I'm not that familiar with the Beast Wars line, I'd only started watching the cartoon a couple of months ago with my buddy Joe. So I didn't know a lot about the line. And when I saw this in the baggie, I actually thought it was just the regular version of Cheetor. And when I got it home and transformed it, I was very disappointed in it. I suppose I couldn't be that disappointed. I mean, I paid, I think, $2.99 Canadian for this. Which is no big deal. It doesn't come with any of the accessories, but it's not something I would even bother to hunt down at this point, given how bad I think the figure is. These awful hands that he's got here in robot mode. So many bad things about it. I'm not even going to get into it here. A terrible figure in my opinion. When it comes to, I guess, one more official figure, I guess there's always, G1 Wheelie, which is the figure I fall back upon when I'm asked this sort of question. And I've got another couple of figures here that I haven't actually opened up, but I can tell just by the packaging that these, although they're not official, would qualify, once I do open them, as some of the worst figures I own. I bought this from Dollarama here in Canada. This is Wolf, and I don't actually know what this figure is. I'm guessing it's some kind of a Beast Wars figure. I really don't know what it is. I didn't look into it at all, but I just thought it might be a fun one to review on my channel. But unfortunately, this is going to have to wait a little while until I have a little more content on the channel. I don't want people to think that this figure right here is indicative of what I'm going to be doing on my channel. So there's that figure there, and I actually have one other one that, I mean, maybe people know what that wolf figure is. I don't. Here's one that I think Beast Wars fans will recognize. I forget the name of it right now, but they've gone with the name Giraffe, just I guess to be original in their naming. It's like they took a page out of the GoBots line. Let's call him Giraffe. Anyways, this looks like it's going to be a terrible figure. So when it comes to unofficial figures, of course, you know, knockoffs like this are pretty bad. I don't have it anymore, but I know back in the day I had a knockoff version of Devastator that I bought from, wasn't a dollar store, but it was sort of, I think it was in Chinatown in Toronto. And it was a $10 version of Devastator, and I would swear that figure was made out of like shampoo bottle plastic. And it had a pretty funky smell to it as well. Gasoline or turpentine or something, I don't know. Anyways, I don't have that one anymore. Anyways, those would be the worst figures I own. I don't tend to buy a lot of bad figures, quite honestly. I try to do my homework first so I'm not wasting money on stuff. Number 5. Question number 5. What is the worst place to find Transformers? And part of the same question, what is the best place to find Transformers? I don't know if anybody outside of Canada has this chain, but here in Canada we have one called Toys Toys Toys. And I like to browse in the store just because they do have a selection of Transformers normally, but I'm going to say it's the worst place to find Transformers for 2 reasons. Number 1, they're usually a series or 2 behind in their stock. So like right now, for instance, you could find the latest selection of Combiner Wars Transformers. They generally wouldn't have like Titan's Return or Power of the Primes at this point. And the main reason why it's the worst place, is due to the price. They would sell a Legends class figure. I was there on the weekend and I saw a Legends class Scrapnel for, I want to say $17, which is absolutely outrageous. So that would be the worst place to find and buy Transformers. The best place, in my experience, I'm going to say the 2 best places to buy Transformers. Number 1 would be eBay. I've been buying Transformers on eBay for years, and I've had really good luck with it. I've got a strategy with it. I usually decide in my mind how much I want to spend in advance, and I try not to overbid. Part of my strategy behind that is I like to try to snipe the auctions at the last second. And I do it for 2 reasons. Number 1, what I mean by sniping the auction is I wait until it's at around 4 seconds left. I mean, you can't cut it too close because sometimes if you're doing it on a tablet or a iPhone like I do, it can glitch out at the last second and your bid won't register. But I like to use that strategy because it also keeps me honest. If I've decided I want to spend $100 on a figure, I place my bid with 3 or 4 seconds left, and I'm not the highest bidder. I don't have time to increase my bid, so it keeps me from making an emotional purchase or an emotional bid. And I also like to use the sniping method because it means that other potential buyers don't have an opportunity to outbid me when they see that maybe they've been outbid. Obviously, that's not taking into account that there's like proxy bidding programs, which I think a lot of people use. I personally don't. I don't know how they work. I don't really trust them. I wouldn't want to give out my personal information. to a proxy bidding service, so that's not something that I use. I just like doing things the good old-fashioned way. So another great place to find Transformers would be local toy conventions. I know here in the Greater Toronto area we have TFCon, and at the same venue, I think it's organized by the same people, we have something called the 80s Toy Show. And as the name suggests, you get a lot of other 80s type figures and memorabilia, including He-Man, G.I. Joe. There's even video games and stuff. But a lot of the vendors there, or dealers, are selling Transformers figures. The cool thing about buying Transformers from a show, number one, is that you get an opportunity to speak to other collectors and meet them face to face, which is always cool. And quite honestly, a lot of them are willing to give you a really good deal on some of this stuff. I mean, a lot of these dealers are collectors just like you and me, and they're more than happy to help out a fellow collector. Quite often they'll offer you the figure for what they paid for it, just to break even. Certainly there are some people there that are out to make a buck, and I guess, I mean, who wouldn't? If you can make a few extra bucks, then why not? But you know, I mentioned eBay a couple of minutes ago. eBay is great because you're finding stuff all over the world, and really the sky's the limit for what you can find. But you'd be surprised what you can find at local toy conventions. A number of my pre-Transformers figures, you know, Microchange and Diaclone figures, came from local toy shows where I had just started talking to some of the dealers at the table, expressed an interest in a few of their cool figures, and before I knew it, they were offering me a great deal. So definitely don't forget about local toy conventions when you're looking for Transformers. Question number 6. What Transformers figure do you want the most? To me, that would be a fairly easy one right now. I'm sort of going to kick it old school with my answer here. I would really like to get the version of G1 Megatron where he is not chromed, so he comes in kind of a flat, matte gray plastic. He doesn't come with the scope or the silencer or the stock or really anything that makes the figure really cool. But part of the reason that I want it is I like to collect official versions of Megatron. Not any old Megatron, like I don't care about, you know, movie figures and stuff like that, but I really love G1 Megatron, so I'd like to get all the versions of that. So that's one that I don't have, that I would like to get at some point, but it would be costly. So likely I won't have that figure anytime soon. Likely never. What Transformers figure do you want to see made? And I don't want to offend anybody with my answer here, because I know we've got all kinds of third-party combiners out there on the market, and don't get me wrong, those are wonderful figures. I don't personally collect too many third-party figures. I mean, I've got a few. You saw my Megatron a little bit earlier. I do pick up the odd figure here and there, but for the most part, I'm an official Transformers collector. So I'd like to see an official Hasbro or, you know, Hasbro and Takara combiner set. I guess to tie me down to an answer, I mean, I'd love to see what they could do with Devastator. He's always been one of my favorite combiners. I think an official Bruticus would be cool. The Seacons would be another very cool combiner. I'd love to see that. Any of those ones I think would make a great start. Predaking, I don't know how I didn't think of that one. Predaking would be another one where I'd love to see an actual, you know, official Masterpiece version. You know, I know we're getting some of these figures, for instance, in modern retail lines. You know, I know that the Devastator that came out a few years ago is pretty decent, but I mean, let's not kid ourselves here. I mean, it's not Masterpiece quality. It's pretty good for a retail figure, very good for a retail figure, but not Masterpiece quality. So that's what I would like to see made. What is the first Transformers figure you bought? Well, I collected Transformers figures when I was a kid back in the 80s, so if we're talking official figures, because I didn't have a lot of money, I would have had to have saved up my allowance, and that wasn't very sizable. I think I had bought a G1 Cliff Jumper mini bot. I believe that was my first official Transformer. And I had a number of knockoff Transformers when I was a kid. We had a flea market. This is before there was Sunday shopping, so this is really going back many years. But there was there was a local flea market that operated every Sunday. And I used to love going there every week with my family. And I remember buying, when I say knockoff, I think it was really a knockoff of the Diaclone version of a couple of the G1 cassettes. I remember I had their version of Ravage, but this one was called Jaguar. And I'm pretty sure that it wasn't the official microchange. I think it was called mini change. If I'm going to take an educated guess based on knockoff versions of the figure that I've seen like in recent times, that I've come across in recent times. So I had a couple of cassettes as well, and nobody cares about GoBots, but I had a couple of official and unofficial GoBots as well. For the record, I actually really like GoBots, but I know they don't get a lot of love for the most part with the Transformers collectors community. Next question. Do you prefer official or third-party Transformers? Who is your favorite third-party company? I think I touched on that a little bit earlier. I prefer official figures, but I'm certainly not closed to the idea of picking up the odd third-party figure just for something to mess around with. But for me, again, I've just always preferred the official figures. I personally think that Takara does a better job when they sort of put rubber to pavement and crank out their official figures. I know a lot of people, for example, have a lot of love for some of the other versions of Masterpiece Megatron. I personally thought a number of them were very cool, but I saw flaws with each of them. When the official Takara figure came along, quite honestly, to me it looked like he just stepped right out of the cartoon. And I quite honestly just didn't see anybody else that had them beat. Who is my favorite third-party? What is my favorite third-party company? I'm going to say, from what I've seen, and I haven't handled any of these toys myself, but I watch a lot of YouTube reviews, so I'm pretty familiar with what's out there. I'm going to say Fans Toys probably would be my favorite. I know they did a fantastic job with the Dinobots. They've got some really cool Insecticons. If I'm not mistaken, they have one of the versions of Omega Supreme that's recently come out. So I'm going to say Fans Toys. What are your thoughts on KO Transformers? That's a really good question. And actually, to answer it better, I'm going to pause this video and I'm going to grab a couple of KO Transformers and discuss them briefly. All right, I'm back. What are your thoughts on KO Transformers? The long and the short of it is that I'm, for the most part, okay with knockoff Transformers. What I'm not okay with, though, is when the knockoffs are packaged in a way where it's intended to confuse or mislead consumers. That would include packaging that looks exactly like the official, Masterpiece packaging, for example. And I quite honestly don't count, there's subtle differences with counterfeit boxes. I know in some cases, if you look closely in the light, the cardboard pattern underneath the artwork, it can either go horizontally or vertically. And I'm forgetting, I think horizontally right now would be the official figures and vertically is knockoff. I can't remember which way it goes, but there's subtle differences like that I quite honestly don't think it's fair to make people try to research and remember when they're trying to make a purchase. And quite honestly, I mean, I know as collectors we know about Takasa Tony, and when I first saw it, I actually had a bit of a chuckle about it myself. But I'm putting myself in the position of somebody maybe going to a Toy Con for the first time, and you see a box that looks like, you know, Masterpiece Megatron or you know, anybody, and you're not going to be looking for something like that. And quite honestly, I know some people make a conscious decision to buy those ones to save a few dollars, but my concern would be with the people that are legitimately attempting to buy you know, a licensed legitimate product and end up paying good money for what's essentially a worthless counterfeit. So I've got an issue with that. I don't want to dwell on that too much though. Going to give you an example of some knockoffs that I do collect and that I do like. You saw the Megatron earlier. Here's one that I've got in my collection. This is an undersized version of the Seacons. I forget how much smaller it is. It's not like world's smallest Transformers size, but it is undersized. And I didn't even know this existed, but I remember several years ago seeing the Collector 75 do a review on this. And I remember as soon as I saw it, I had started researching where I could get one myself. So this was a purchase that I made, quite honestly, thanks to Graham. And I love it. I think these are great. Another one I bought that I don't have handy right now would be the undersized version of Predaking as well. And obviously one other thing to point out about this version is it's almost in like G2 colors. You can see it's very different from the official figure. And I just think it's a great conversation piece. Other than that, some of my favorite knockoffs in my collection, anybody that watched my collection video would have seen these. Prehistory Animal Dinobots. And I don't want things to get out of focus here, but these are fantastic vintage knockoffs. You can tell by the packaging that, you know, they're very different from the official Transformers figures. So there's no, you know, making a mistake and, you know, buying one of these, you know, instead of an actual, you know, Hasbro Snarl in this case. But here's one of them. This is their version of Snarl. This one is very cool here. This is the Prehistory Animal version of Sludge. And if you look closely, he's actually got wings and he's got a head that's a lot like G1 Swoop, which you won't be able to see here, but I will review these on my channel at some point in the future. Shout out to my buddy Jeremy. I'm sorry, I'm using my phone right now to record this video, so I can't give your Instagram a proper shout out right now, but I know my buddy Jeremy on Instagram has a really nice set of these, multiples actually. So I know, you know, he's one of their collector that really appreciates these. This one is the slag version here. You can see some differences with it as well. Or I guess you probably won't be able to see them in the box. And the last one I'll just show quick. This is my Prehistory Animal version of Grimlock. The really cool thing about these Prehistory Animal Dinobots is that they took the time to remold the figures slightly. I mean, in some cases more than others. And I think they're really cool and very, very collectible. I know that often these can go for several $100s, especially box specimens. But, you know, for instance, I'm looking at the picture here of Grimlock. You know, he's got a metal gold tongue. He's got a tusk on the end of his nose. They've stripped out the Diaclone cockpit. And along his back, he's got these just different remolded ridges. Anyways, I could talk on and on about these, but I won't. I do like knockoffs. I like oversized knockoffs, undersized knockoffs. I do like knockoffs that are the same size, but ideally a little bit different. I know there's a version of G1 Mirage that I have that's completely clear, including the rubber tires. And I like that because it's almost like you can set them up in a way where your Mirage has turned invisible. like he used to do in the cartoon. So I think that's cool. I've also got, I was going to say a red and white version of Mirage, but I think there was an official Diaclone version of that in that color scheme, if I'm not mistaken. I don't really see the point in, personally, in getting like, G1 knockoffs of figures that I could just go out and buy, unless they're extremely expensive. I know I've got a set of the knockoff G1 dinosaur combining cassettes, and I got those because I got a set of 4 of them for $100, but it would have probably cost me about $1,000, probably more than $1,000 to get a set of the legitimate versions. And quite honestly, I'm just not going to spend that kind of money on a couple of small cassette figures. Who is your favorite? This is question number 11. Sorry, I'm rambling on a little longer than I thought I would. Who is your favorite Transformers character? That's an easy one for me. I've always loved G1 Megatron. I thought he was fantastic in the cartoon. Love the original toy. Megatron, hands down, for me, it's Megatron. Absolutely love him. What is your favorite Transformers series? Well, I'm an old school kind of guy, so for me, it would be the G1 Transformers series. I've recently watched Beast Wars, and I actually quite enjoyed that. And I also liked the Transformers Prime series. So if I were to rate them, those three, I would say the G1 series is my favorite because it's what I'm most nostalgic over. Then I would say Transformers Prime, and then probably Beast Wars. Those two I could maybe flip, depending on my mood, back and forth. The Beast Wars series was quite good. I don't know, I sort of flip-flop on those two. But my favorite is G1. Which do you prefer, Hasbro or Takara on the regular lines? And it says here, movies, generations, etc. When I was buying a lot of classics figures several years ago, and by classics I mean like what people call chug figures, classics, Henkei, Universe, Generations figures. When I was deep into those lines, I was trying to buy just the Takara versions because I preferred the additional paint applications on the figures, and just overall they felt like slightly better quality. I like the packaging for them. When it comes to modern line figures, quite honestly, I really can't be bothered. I think I would prefer the Takara ones for the most part, again for the same reason, but these days I really couldn't be bothered spending the money importing those figures here to Canada. The paint applications just don't mean that much to me now as maybe they did, 5 or 6 years ago. So I prefer Takara, but I'll definitely settle for Hasbro. Number 14, Transformers movies. Love them or hate them? If you'd asked me, I'm trying to remember when the first one, maybe 10 years ago, I would have said I hate the movies. I hated the movies for a couple of reasons. They were just very different from what I was used to. I've always been a bit of a G1 guy. It's got a special place in my heart. Obviously, I collect Masterpiece and retail and all kinds of other stuff now. But seeing what they did to a number of those characters in the Michael Bay movies really bothered me. I mean, I didn't like the designs of the figures. I didn't like decisions that they made in the movies as it relates to some of the figures. Like, I don't know why Bumblebee couldn't speak. He could communicate through his radio, which I thought was really stupid. There was just things that I hated about the movies. Now, in the last several years, though, I've done a bit of a 180 on that. I think the positive thing about the movies coming out is that they had created interest in the Transformers line again. And quite honestly, I think because of that, we've got a lot of the cool figures today that we might not have had, and I'm not talking about movie figures. I still don't like the toys for the most part. with some exceptions. I do like some of the toys, but for the most part, I don't. If I was going to give a sweeping answer for the, my view on the entire line is I don't like the toys, but I'm betting that the amount of money that Hasbro has made from the, what is it, 5 movies now that they've come out with, from the various toy lines and that sort of thing, has probably funded what I would consider to be a lot of much cooler Transformers lines. And by that I mean, the Masterpiece line might have got some of its bankroll from that. And even some of the cool, I love what Hasbro is doing with retail figures right now. Absolutely love the Titans Return line, Power of the Primes line. Loved the nods to G1 in both of those lines. And quite honestly, maybe we wouldn't have had some of the engineering or ideas for some of those figures if it hadn't come from money that was generated from those Michael Bay movies. But again, I've done a bit of a 180 on the movies themselves. I've accepted them for what they are. The Bayverse can exist in my Transformers universe, although for the most part, they're not my favorite incarnations of the figures. But I can watch the movies now and just take them for what they are and enjoy them for seeing Transformers on the big screen, quite honestly. So I don't have the hate for the movies like I once did. Although, to be honest with you, I remember when I saw Revenge of the Fallen in the theater, I actually fell asleep very briefly midway through the movie. And that never happens to me when I watch movies. So I don't know how telling that is, but moving on. Looks like we're at the last question. Number 15. Do you think Hot Rod got Optimus Prime killed in the Transformers movie? The long and the short of it for this is that, yes, the way the events played out in the movie, Hot Rod did get Optimus Prime killed. But let's be honest here, and I know a couple of other people have touched on this. Hot Rodney Prime mentioned that, nobody would be talking about that movie now if some of those things hadn't happened. If Optimus Prime and several of our favorite figures from back in the day hadn't been killed off like that, nobody would care or be talking about it now. A good point that Bisto Yeti had made in when he answered these questions was, if I'm not mistaken, it was him, but he had said, yeah, he did get Optimus Prime. Sorry, he said, no, he said Hasbro killed Optimus Prime, which I thought was a good answer, because the long and the short of it for the Transformers 1986 animated movie was that they needed to kill off the toys that everybody had purchased and grown to know and love. They wanted to make room and make way for the next wave of toys, and they just didn't think that we had the connection as kids that we did to those characters. If it hadn't have been Hot Rod that got him killed, then, I mean, even if you remove him from that scene, they probably would have had Megatron kill Optimus Prime anyways, and, moved ahead with Megatron being reformatted into Galvatron, and Optimus Prime dying, and Hot Rod or somebody else taking over leadership. But again, the bottom line for that 86 movie is that was the objective. Didn't matter who did it. The old figures had to die to make way for the new figures. Quite honestly, though, in Hot Rod's defense, and while I do think it is his fault the way the events played out in the movie, I think he gets a bit of a bad rap about that whole thing, killing the leader of the Autobots. People took that very seriously. A lot of people hated the toy, hated the character because of that. And I'm just curious to know, if it had any sort of impact on sales of the toy at the time. I know my buddy Joe, when we both got back into collecting, I think I'd picked up a Hot Rod for my collection and, maybe given him a tip about, might have been an eBay auction or something to do the same. And I remember he said he didn't like Hot Rod. He didn't want to buy one. And here we were, adult collectors, and It stemmed from what he told me all the way back to when, when we were kids, and Hot Rod, his responsibility for Optimus Prime's death. Now, in fairness to Joe, he's come around in recent years, and I know he, if I'm not mistaken, he's picked up a G1 Hot Rod, and I think he also bought, it might have been the Henkei version several years ago. So he's done a bit of a 180 on that, but I don't know. I really would have preferred if they had just made Optimus Prime get killed by Megatron. I don't know why they had to have interference from Hot Rod or any of the other Autobots for that matter. But anyways, just my view on it. That's it for the 15 questions. Now we're at the part of the video where I need to tag a couple of other people. And I don't want to make anybody feel obligated here. So certainly if you want to do it, I think it'd be a bit of fun. But if you don't feel like doing it, don't worry about it. No explanation is necessary. But I'd like to tag a couple of people. First person I'm going to tag is Sea-Dog, good buddy of mine on YouTube. Big fan of his channel. He's always very supportive of what I do here. Retro Now, also known as the Retro Nostalgic Nerd. I don't think he's been tagged, but I would like to tag him. If he's already been tagged by somebody else, then that's all good. I'd still like to hear what he has to say. Bumblebee85 Has Toys would be another person that I would like to see if he has time to do it. I'm naming a couple of people again just because I'd like to keep this going. I don't really want to see this die on the vine because I do think it's a lot of fun to learn more about one another as collectors. Revenge Creature Reviews. I'd like to see him do it. Transformers Combiner Couple. The next channel that I want to tag is G1 Transformers and More. This is a father and son duo. They do a lot of G1 Transformers and they've gotten into Masterpiece Transformers recently. I'm really enjoying what they're doing on their channel, so if they'd be up for taking on the tag challenge, I'd love to see what they have in store for us. The next one I want to mention is Cyber Tiger Retro Toy Showcase and Reviews. Now, Cyber Tiger is the founding member of the International Nerd Team, the INT, which I'm proud to be a part of. He recently retired from making YouTube videos just for a number of personal reasons, which you can watch a video he did, I think his second last video, he talked about a special announcement, which was why he was leaving YouTube. So you can always check that out. But if he was interested in taking this on, I think a tag challenge like this would be right up his alley. Cyber Tiger's got a fantastic collection. He showed it off in a 2-part Man Cave tour video that he did. Amazing collection. He's been collecting for years. And if he could find the time and wanted to do it, I would actually love to see a video from Cyber Tiger. And last but not least, I'd like to see the boys from Nerd Out do it. I don't think they have been tagged yet, which I'm surprised about, just because their Nerd Out channel is very popular. They've got a great format for answering questions just like this. So if they haven't already been tagged, I'd really like to see Randy and Brian from Nerd Out do it as well. Anyways, everyone, thank you very much for joining me. Sorry to ramble on as long as I did in this video. It was a lot of fun, and I've got some big plans for the channel ahead of me. Be sure to subscribe, like, comment, share, not necessarily in that order. I've got a lot of interesting things in my collection that I want to share with everybody, and I really hope you'll join me in my YouTube journey. Anyways, thanks again, everyone. Take care.